U.S. upended trade relations with sweeping reciprocal tariffs. That announcement sent a ripple effect around the globe. New data shows China's exports to the U.S. slowed in August to a 6-month low. Joining us now to discuss is Daniel Lacalle, chief economist at Tressis, a wealth management and financial services company. He's also an international financial analyst and author of the book Freedom or Equality. So Daniel, let's get right into the numbers here. Data shows that China's export to the U.S. plunged 33% last month, and imports from the U.S. to China fell 16% from a year ago. Can you help us make sense of these numbers in terms of perhaps impact to businesses, consumers? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Don. I think that a lot of things to take out from these figures. Number one is that the narrative that U.S. consumers would absorb tariffs has been completely debunked. The decline in exports shows that, number one, the suppliers all over the world are happy to sell to the United States, and that United States distributors are finding no problem to fill their orders with other products, and that Chinese companies are unable to pass the tariff to consumers. One of the things that is very interesting is that export growth is much lower than what market estimated, which also shows that Chinese exporters are not able to find other markets other than the United States. Yes, exports have grown, but they've grown significantly below what analysts expected. So the first one is obviously that there is absolutely no evidence that United States companies are accepting from Chinese exporters an increase in prices due to tariffs. Number two, that those Chinese exporters are not able either to maintain their margins and continue exporting as much as they did. And number three, that there has been no evidence whatsoever in the United States of a reduction in availability of products. So there is a very significant, coming from the trade data that we saw the other day, a very significant shift. A lot of products are coming from other countries and not from China. This is an interesting one. A lot of countries are actually adapting very, very well to the current environment.
How do you think this impacts China's economy? Because we've talked about in the past how China's economy perhaps is not the best. How is this going to add to that?
Well, a number of things are very, very challenging for the Chinese economy. Number one, as you know, the Chinese government is implementing drastic measures to try to reduce overcapacity and try to bring or at least curb the decline in prices in China. The deflationary risks in China are very significant. But think about this. If exporters are unable to continue to grow their volumes globally by eliminating the United States market, and at the same time, United States exports have declined so severely, it shows two things. Number one is that the richest and best market is not accepting the prices that they're selling at, and certainly that will continue to erode margins and continue to worsen the working capital problem of Chinese exporters. And number two, it is also going to show that they are going to find themselves in a very challenging environment to maintain jobs and to maintain production. Those three elements, lower prices, lower margins, and the risks to employment, are things that add to an already challenging situation for China coming from the real estate bubble burst.
So since the tariffs have passed, imposed rather, do you think we're entering a new chapter, if you will, between trade between the U.S. and China? And if we are, how would you describe this new chapter?
Well, I think I would call it adaptation. I think that there were too many narratives moving around markets about what would happen. What we are seeing is that companies globally are adapting through technology. Supply chains are stronger than what a lot of people expected, and certainly a lot more flexible. And Chinese companies that were used to sell to the United States all of their excess capacity and try with that to reduce their enormous working capital challenges are going to find a very significant problem. So the next step is quite interesting. either these companies start to reduce prices and start to adapt to an environment in which demand is not as, I would say, as inelastic as some people expected, or we're going to see a massive move from these exporters trying to dump their products in any other market. And this is interesting. The European Union, that has complained so much about the trade agreements between different nations and the United States, is now concerned that the European Union will be flooded with cheap Chinese products coming from this challenge of working capital from exporters.
Do you think the Chinese economy will ever go back to its peak, seeing how things are now?
It's very difficult. It's incredibly difficult. I mean, the Chinese economy reached this peak by opening the economy, implementing measures that would give economic freedom to citizens and improve the landscape for businesses. And unfortunately, the government has decided to gradually close the economy and impose more interventionism and more direct implications in the strategies of companies, including those of forcing companies to invest and to hire people that they and putting money in things that they were not planning to do. So the problem of interventionism is not going to work. Central planning is what doesn't work. What helped the Chinese economy reach a peak was precisely avoiding central planning in economic matters. By allowing economic freedom, allowing more open trade, allowing more open businesses, etc., that helped China reduce poverty, increase productivity, and improve growth. What has damaged the Chinese economy is central planning. Central planning is what created this enormous real estate bubble that is bursting now in front of the Chinese people's faces. And central planning is what created this enormous overcapacity that is mostly concentrated in state-owned companies. Unfortunately, the government, instead of looking at what drove growth and productivity and reduction of poverty, which was economic opening, is actually trying desperately to make socialism work by getting together with Russia, Brazil, and other countries that are certainly not going to give them prosperity, but stagnation. And that is the problem, is that unfortunately, China, instead of deciding to go down the way of prosperity, is going down the way of interventionism.
So essentially you're saying, and this is just the last thing, Daniel, you're saying that essentially central planning has led to the state of the current economy in China and the CCP's actions there. So if that's the case, then the CCP needs to relinquish more control and let the market, do its thing, right? If this is the case, then I see a dilemma, because the CCP does not want to give up more control. But on the other hand, it needs the economy in order for it to exist. So, I mean, seems like it's between a rock and a hard place.
It is between a rock and a hard place. You've said it very well. And unfortunately, there is a trend in China that you know very well, in which there is a group of intellectuals trying to convince the government that through technology and artificial intelligence, they're going to make communism work. Communism doesn't work because it ignores the basic elements of economic calculus. That is the reason why communism has never worked and is not going to work with or without artificial intelligence. So I think that is the problem, is this obsession of trying to bake the cake and eat it. The Chinese economy achieved the most spectacular levels of growth and reduction of poverty seen in recent history by opening the economy. Unfortunately, since the decision to maintain the power of Xi Jinping almost forever, every single policy measure has been to reduce the operating and economic and financial freedom of businesses, particularly in technology. And think about this. The race in the technology battle of China has started to worsen relative to the United States precisely when the government decided to intervene in the technology sector. Suddenly, patents all of the innovations, all of the great improvements that were being achieved started to slow down dramatically. And it's logical. Central planning never works. It doesn't work in the euro area, as we are seeing with Germany, with France, etc. It doesn't work. It didn't work in Japan. It doesn't work in the UK, and it's certainly not going to work in China. And they will unfortunately learn the hard way. Hopefully, somebody will come up and implement opening measures.
You know, I think, Daniel, you're spot on there, because I talked to a guest before, and they phrased it like in a way that it's only a matter of time that the Chinese Communist Party will collapse. But thank you for the conversation today, Daniel. It was a pleasure. U.S. exports to China also fell, down 16% compared to a year ago. The slowdown comes as the Trump administration cracks down on transshipments of goods to the U.S. That's when Chinese goods are routed through other countries like Singapore or Mexico to avoid U.S. tariffs. In response, Washington imposed a 40% duty back in July on any shipment it suspects of being a transshipment. China's growth is now at its weakest in 6 months. Beijing has been trying to boost trade with other Asian countries and the European Union to counter trade tensions with Washington. But the U.S. remains China's largest trading partner, with nearly $283 billion in imports so far this year. Despite tensions ongoing, the two sides extended their tariff truce for another 90 days. Washington's tariffs on Beijing's goods stood at 55%, while Beijing keeps a 30% tariff on Washington's exports. But the peace is fragile. President Trump has threatened tariffs as high as 200% if China doesn't follow through on its pledge to increase rare earth shipments. For now, exports of rare earth materials to the U.S. are up nearly 23% as of August. Police in Kathmandu, Nepal, opened fire on protesters today, killing at least 17